Okay, let's get started here this evening. I'm going to try to be respectful of everyone's time. We got a little bit later start, so I don't want to keep you out too late. We may have kids to put to bed or just winding down the day. Um, Welcome to our discussion about coaches' legal duties, 9 legal duties to be exact. This is an important risk management topic, and I'm going to share the screen here so we can get going. So this is an important topic, an important risk management topic. And those of you who've taken some coaching courses will obviously hear some stuff that is redundant to information shared in the coaching courses. Of course, they're just instructing you on how to be good coaches. We're going to clue you in that some of the reason that those things are there and they make you good coaches is also they protect the kids and they fulfill these responsibilities as well. From time to time, just to let you know, we have gotten a few complaints from coaches about coaches or duty clubs who have parents call us asking questions. They won't realize what they're asking, but it'll be about a violation of one of these. The situation, we address it with the club, usually clears up right away. We've been fortunate to be able to address the situation without having any injuries, and I'll say that and knock on wood. A couple of acknowledgments as we get started. The foundational information in this presentation actually comes from Rainier Martin's book, Successful Coaching. And if this were a term paper, there'd be footnotes crediting Mr. Martin's throughout the presentation. So I want to give him his due. As a disclosure, this is not legal advice. We are discussing about legal duties and legal concepts, but this cannot be construed as legal advice. For that, you would need your attorney. So we'll be covering a lot of information. I am recording, and this will be posted on the town hall page of our website, so you'll be able to revisit the information at any time. And certainly if you email me, I can email you the slide deck so that you have it to reference down the road. And as fair warning, I may ask some questions, and certainly feel free to interrupt me and ask questions or hit the chat box or raise the hand. And but the best thing, we're a small group here, so the best thing to do is just open your mic and ask your question, and we'll see what we can do to give you an answer. So now that housekeeping's done, let's dive into the presentation. What's the session going to contain? We're going to talk about liability and how it fits in our system of justice. We'll identify the legal duties of a coach within that system, and we'll talk about a couple of more important items as well. We're going to examine negligence and what that means. And lastly, we'll look at managing the risk to protect the player and the coach. Yes, you will be protecting yourself by doing these things. So very important. Liability. That's the state of being responsible for something, especially by law. Little different definition there on the screen, but pretty much the same thing. You have a legal liability with fulfilling your responsibilities and duties. Falls into 2 areas: torts and contracts, and tort law is what's applicable to most litigations involving coaches. Civil law is the part of the country's set of laws which are concerned with a wrong rather than a crime, and that wrong is in quotation marks. People can commit a crime and be also sued civilly, but not all civil actions can be crimes. And then with tort law, tort is an act or omission that gives rise to injury or harm to another and amounts to a civil wrong, for which the court will impose liability. Questions so far? So tort law is about determining if a person has or hasn't conformed. Coaches have 9 of those to fulfill. Failing to do so could result in a lawsuit if the failure results in an injury. Duty number 1. properly plan the activity. That means develop a progression. Test players to determine physical capacity, technical level. Typically, that's done during the tryouts or an evaluation phase when your club's sorting out teams and players. And then as you have your first couple of training sessions, you're going to want to take a look at them as well. And maybe if you notice that somebody's not quite up to speed, you may want to go right place, particularly if you're coaching in Division 4 or higher, the very competitive, most competitive leagues. This allows us to, get the players playing at the appropriate level of competition. Have written practice plans using the sound training principles that are covered within the U.S. soccer framework of coaching education. Adapt your plans to the individual needs of your athletes and certainly the circumstances that arise. If you're expecting 11 and you've planned for 11, but only 7 show up, then you're going to need to tweak what you're doing a little bit because you have fewer players to work with. So you've set those plans in motion. You've identified the order in which you're going to do things, and you want to follow that. And then, of course, keep records of your planning and testing and evaluations and all the happenings with your team. So let's go to duty number 2, and that is provide proper supervision. The current instructional standard is in the sport of soccer. Teach techniques, tactics, and rules according to customary soccer practices. Let's not take any shortcuts, and let's not teach kids things that aren't appropriate for their ages. For instance, there's no heading from 11-year-olds down. With reason, studies have shown that their neck and shoulder muscles just aren't strong enough to support the collision between the head and a soccer ball. So therefore, we don't instruct that to avoid an injury. Your instructions to your athletes should be clear, complete, consistent, and you should provide adequate feedback to your players about their progress. All of these things are important to help them get better and help them understand what you're trying to accomplish. And when you break out into groups, head coaches must supervise any instruction delegated to assistant coaches. And why would this be? Well, because you're responsible for what the assistant coach coaches, and if he would decide to coach something other than what you're working on, and there's an injury, you're still going to be responsible for his actions. And before we go to duty number 3, just want to give you a quick little, we'll go back to this one, quick little scenario. This was in the state of New York. There was a 12-year-old girl who had trained as a midfielder. And the coach put her into goal during a game. It was a runaway. So they put her into goal. In the run of play, she suffered a severe head injury and had permanent brain damage. The player sued the coach, charging negligence for placing the girl in a position she was not trained to play. It went to court, and during the trial, the coach testified that goalkeeper was a specialized position, and he had never trained the girl to play that position. Immediately after that testimony, there was a recess, and the case was settled for $750,000. So it's very important that you do have a plan, and you follow the plan, and you provide the supervision and the instruction for those players to make sure that you don't put them in harm's way. Duty number 3, warn of inherent risks. There's only a couple of bullet points here. We do this when during registration. Pretty much every club has some sort of acknowledgement for the parents or a waiver for the parents, making them aware that soccer is a contact sport, and in playing contact sports there are risks associated. However, that's the club's responsibility It also falls to the coach as well. So usually the very first practice of any teams I'm coaching, I will have a parent meeting and I will remind them of the inherent risks. And then I will talk to the players with my player meeting, reminding them of the inherent risks. It's also cool to find videos, magazine articles throughout the season, not just at the beginning of the year, but anytime one would pop up that would allow you to remind everybody of the risks involved with the sport. You could share these with your athletes. And of course, due to safe sport regulations, you're going to want to copy the parents in, but it's probably a pretty good idea to let them see it as well, just to reinforce that soccer's a contact sport and there is an inherent risk. But we're going to do everything we can to mitigate it by fulfilling all of these duties. So what's number 4? That means make sure that the field is clear of debris. There aren't any holes, there aren't any glass. That it's ready to go and up to snuff. That means you should inspect the facility. Have it when you're doing your preseason planning, develop a checklist for the facilities and equipments. Make sure that you use that checklist to make sure that the field and equipment and everything is up to snuff. And if you see something that is off, notify the club. Hey, the goal on this field is a little out of shape. The bolts need to be tightened on it, or we need to replace it. It's rickety, it's falling down. There's a hole on this field that is too big, and there wasn't any extra dirt to fill. I put some cones around it, but we need to get that repaired right away. Also for dangerous conditions, weather, lightning, heavy winds, bad cold, severe heat. Those particular items, they're heat related, cold related, weather related stuff. There are documents on our website on the forms page, I believe, not the forms page, but on the supplemental information page under coaching that provides you with some information about how to recognize and deal with heat, what to do when it's very, very cold, when it's appropriate to play, when it's not appropriate to play, what to do with lightning. I'll throw this out. Anyone here tell me how long they should wait after the last lightning strike before returning to play? 30 minutes. Yes, very good. Years ago it was 20. Now it's 30. I know in Kansas, they recently settled a lawsuit that lightning strike that happened. And this is kind of a freak thing. I wouldn't worry about it, but on a clear, sunny blue day, a young man was struck by lightning and suffered permanent debilitating injuries. His club was sued. The lightning actually came from a storm that was 60 miles away. Gives you an indication of how dangerous lightning can be and how far away it can be, and still strike. The lawsuit centered around the club not having turned on their automatic detection system like they should have that day. And they didn't turn it on because it was a beautiful blue sunny day. And the skies were blue, there wasn't a cloud, and they should have been monitoring the weather and realized there was a storm relatively close and turned it on just in case. But they did not, and the young man was injured. And the final settlement there with the insurance company was $1.3 million. It took about 3 years in the legal system before they settled it. This happened right before COVID. Very, very unfortunate circumstance. Not sure if the lightning detector had been on, whether or not it would have caused the club to clear the fields before he was struck by lightning. But certainly those steps, you need to be aware of the conditions surrounding or in your area, so that you know what maybe you should or shouldn't do. And just be aware. In this case, simply flipping a button because there was a storm 60 miles away. There's a thunderstorm in the area. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Lastly, have rules. This isn't the last one. There's one more. Have rules for using the facility and enforce them. And again, monitor the changing environment, make prudent judgments about continuing if it becomes hazardous. Provide adequate and proper equipment. Soccer is not quite the same as football or baseball or lacrosse or hockey, where there's a lot of gear. But we do have uniforms and we do have goals, and we want to make sure that those things fit properly and they're the right size and they're in good working order. So you're going to want to purchase the best equipment that your club can afford. You're going to want to teach your kids about the equipment. Again, with soccer, there's not a whole lot of equipment to teach them how to use, but for goalkeepers, proper use of goal, proper fit and use of goalkeeper gloves, proper fit and use of shin guards, cleats. There are still some pieces of equipment that need to be they need to learn about, and you should inspect inspect your players' equipment. If you see a kid wearing a pair of shin guards that aren't up to snuff, maybe make arrangements if you can to remind him to get something a little bit bigger or a little more adequate. Same with shoes. Of course, we know that some kids are in financial situation where that might be a little different issue. And that may take some help from an angel fund dad to get the kid a pair of proper fitting cleats, proper fitting shin guard. But certainly, we want to try to make sure that our players have adequate equipment. Comes to things like goals and repair and installation, make sure that the individuals are qualified. We had a club in the deep south who had a goal come apart, and they had a gentleman who was a welder who decided he could weld the aluminum back together. Unfortunately, he did not have a whole lot of experience welding aluminum, and made a disaster of it. And it ended up they had to buy a new set of goals, which was unfortunate for them because he was trying to save them money because they really couldn't afford a new set of goals. But they ended up getting a new set of goals. And again, in that case, they were penny wise and pound foolish. They should have actually had someone who knew what they were doing with that procedure come in, and it would have cost them a little bit more, but they probably could have salvaged the goals instead of having to buy new ones. About the potential hazardous nature of equipment, handwritten are recommended. Players love to swing on goals, particularly the smaller goals that we use on the under 10 fields and on the under 12 fields. The players can jump up and hang off the crossbars on those. And depending on what the soil is like and how damp it is, even if they're staked down, there's a potential a player could cause a goal to topple over. In my club a number of years ago, we had a young man who went to practice with his dad. His dad pulled the goals out, got them lined up on the field, started staking at one end, and his son was swinging on the crossbar at the other end, pulled the goal over. It hit him in the back of the head and drove him face first into the ground. And he subsequently had to have 3 surgeries to reposition his teeth and correct the damage done to the soft palate in his mouth. Again, that would have been avoidable, and there was not a lawsuit. We did face an insurance claim on that, so we avoided a lawsuit. But again, Dad was the coach, and he should have made sure that he told his son to not swing on the goals, to leave them alone until they were properly anchored. But even when anchored, they shouldn't be swinging on them. Goals are the most dangerous part of our sport. And the last thing is make sure that the equipment we're using is the current accepted standards. Equipment has changed in soccer over the years. When I started playing, we didn't have to wear shin guards. Leather, and they were very heavy and clunky. Now shoes are very, very light. They're made out of a variety of different synthetic surface, synthetic materials, and the cleat patterns and everything. They're designed for the players to light on their feet and to be quicker than the old shoes. But the balls are much lighter as well. The old balls when I was a kid, they were made out of leather. And when you played on a wet day, they just soaked up the water and got heavier as you played. So, um, know what the current accepted standard is. Nobody's playing with a leather ball any longer. And if you did, there'd probably be some injuries because of it. Duty number 6, match your athletes appropriately. This is actually very tricky one. It's very important, but it's very tricky. You want to use size and maturity and skill and experience as well as age when you're pairing players, particularly for 1v1 um, things that you're doing in your training sessions. You want to make sure that you don't have with the smallest kid, this kid. Those kinds of pairings do not end well. Eligibility rules should be enforced. So if the cutoff is, in our case, January 1, but again, that was born on December 1st. They're 30 days older than the rest of the age group, so they need to be in their proper age group. And again, this club then to the coaches around the club saying, hey, can Billy be on my team? There's a reason that we have rules, and it's to try to help make sure that we've got the right kids in the right place. Modify your practice plan when mismatches in ability cannot easily be corrected. If you've got it and you see it, sometimes you do have to change your plan just because you don't have the right personnel to execute what you planned on doing. Be especially alert to mismatches between sexes when athletes are recovering from injury or illness, and among athletes with disabilities. Um, those are all very, very important elements. Typically, most coaches are not going to see those if they're coaching a boys team or a girls team. The biggest one there would be recovering from injury or illness, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Appropriately, we did have a club here last fall that had 10-year-olds through 15-year-olds all on the same team. And because they weren't quite sure what to do, they were making a good faith effort to try to get all the kids on the field. But again, you're going from 5th or 6th grader up through a freshman in high school. There's a pretty big disparity in those kids. So you want to try to avoid those types of mismatches at all costs. Number 7, we're going to touch on something mentioned before a little bit later, and later is now. You want to evaluate athletes for injury and incapacity. This is more high school and college physicals. Find out if your players had a physical and did the outcome permit participation. We are not required by law to have physicals, but Pennsylvania law does require school districts to conduct those before play starts. Keep a medical history on your team, and by that I mean ask for a medical waiver or medical release form from every parent. This form just will have them list if there's any medical issues that you need to know about as a coach. Do I have anybody that is allergic to bee stings, allergic to, has nut allergies, has diabetes, and have a private conversation with the parent on what needs to be done with those individuals so that you can intervene if there's a medical issue right away. Do they need an EpiPen? Is there something we can do? In the case of someone with diabetes, is there something I need to do? Or if he starts to feel a little weird and knows what it is, does he just need to go over and get some medication out of his bag and take care of it himself or herself? So it's important the coach know these things. return to play, get medical approval for permitting return to play. Illness, parental approval's fine. If it's something serious, broken bone, concussion, you're going to want medical approval. And then on top of that, even though you've received that approval, you're going to want to evaluate that player's readiness to return to participation. In ODP, we had several players that have gotten doctor's clearances. They've come back, and our coaching staff has noticed that they're still listing to one side, or they still have a noticeable limp. They're not ready to return to play at that point. So we have that conversation with the child. And in some cases, we will even send them back to the doctor for another opinion, simply because we don't want that player to participate and re-injure him or herself, and we make things worse instead of making them better. Duty number 8, supervise the activity closely. What this means is you are responsible for the general supervision of your team when it's training or playing. You're responsible for specific supervision during instruction on new techniques or tactics and when risk of injury increases. You need to know soccer so well that you can anticipate potential dangers and prevent them from occurring. I would add, you also need to know kids so well that you can anticipate potential dangers and prevent them from occurring, because kids will find very, very creative ways to put themselves in harm's way. When I was coaching my son's under 10 team, we had a boy who just loved to find new and dangerous ways to have fun while we were training, and he would disappear on us, and we'd find him perched on the top of a 15-foot fence that was behind the baseball diamond, or we'd find him tightrope walking on a wire that was supposed to be supporting something in the park. So kids will be their own worst enemies in some ways, and you need to identify those elements and try to keep kids away from them. Be aware that posters, notices, and signs do not replace your supervision. Good example is in the pool area, where there are signs posted that say no running on the wet deck. It's a slip hazard. That is to protect the building, not to protect the coach. So you need to be there to make sure that there's no running. Even though the signs say don't do it, you would need to be there to prevent it completely. Last, behavior that threatens the safety of any athlete, and that would include, in the aforementioned case of the young athlete who decided to climb to the top of 15-foot fence. So you don't want to chuckle at that as much as it might be funny. You don't want to let him know that you think it's funny. You want to let him know that he's overstepped the bounds. Number 9, provide appropriate emergency assistance. Again, consent medical forms, get them, which players have had medical issues. Actually, your club should help you with having a plan and establish an emergency plan before the season, so that you know what to do in various situations. Our club, when I was coaching my kids, we actually worked with the local hospital, and not only did they help us have little checklists and things, but they also gave us a med kit for every team. So we had a nice little, they were actually Craftsman toolboxes, and they were filled with all kinds of stuff, from bee sting swabs to packets of gauze and ace bandages, and a couple of the snap ice packs and things like that. So have a plan, and make sure that you're ready to use it. Again, protect, if you have an injury, that an athlete who's injured, you're going to want to protect that athlete from further harm. You're going to want to provide the appropriate first aid. Good idea, take a first aid course. Comfort and reassure the athlete so that they know that they're calm. If it's a serious injury, you're going to activate your emergency plan, and that may include calling 911. If it's a very serious injury or episode, You may have to take action to maintain or restore life using CPR and or an AED if one's available at the facility. Again, you're going to activate the emergency plan and call 911, allow trained medical personnel to intervene as quickly as possible. And the last thing you're going to want to do is complete an injury report to give to the club so that they're aware. And you'll want to keep a copy for your own records. So those are the 9 duties. Before we jump into other duties and other things here and get to the second half, we've got a short list of other duties here. 1, keep adequate records, and we'll get to why that's important here in a minute. Be the first and the last to leave. That's just to make sure you're there before any kids. So there isn't something that a kid could get into and injure himself before there's an adult on site. Parents love to pull up and drop their kid off and dash away without realizing that there's nobody there to supervise my kid. And you want to be the last to leave. You want to make sure that every kid has gotten in a vehicle and gone home. Pursue proper training. This would be coaching education as well as first aid training. This again is a touch point that is more for high school and college. In those levels of play, coaches are often responsible for making sure that there's transportation to get their team where their team needs to go. 5, we're reporters in the hear or suspect anything related to child abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. We need to report that to Childline and also to Safe Sport. Lastly, to protect your athletes' constitutional rights, including right to fair treatment, right to free expression, right to not be discriminated against, and of course their right to due process, which is also provided by the United States Soccer Federation and PAOS Soccer per our guidelines. That would mean that your club can't kick them out of the club without giving them a hearing. You can't kick them off the team without giving them the opportunity to defend themselves against the action. So that's what due process is. As we circle back to number 1, why should I as a coach keep adequate records? So a number of years ago in New Jersey, and this goes back many, many years, it was a 10-year-old boy who was moved from second base to the outfield in an all-star baseball game. And during practice for that game, he was hit in the eye after misjudging a fly ball for $750,000 for that. The boy had never trained to play in the outfield. The coaches actually had documents that they had indeed had him practice as an outfielder and given him instruction as an outfielder. And so the lawsuit went away. The insurance company did provide a small settlement of $25,000, but because they had recorded that they had given him, and specifically they went into detail on how they trained him to be an outfielder. They were able to back themselves out of what could have been a very, very tricky situation. And a little bit further, I'll share a little more of a little more of that story as it applies to us. As we circle around the number 6, though, one thing I just want to point out here in PA West, we do have a Bill of Rights for our players. Players have a right to participate in sport. They have a right to participate at the level commensurate with their ability and maturity. They have a right to qualified leadership. They have a right to play as a child, not an adult. And I think many times the adults associated with the game sometimes forget that our players are children. and we should not expect to see them perform in a manner similar to what we would see in the MLS or in the English Premier League. Children have a right to share in the leadership and the decision making of their particular sport. They have a right to participate in safe and healthy environment. They have a right to proper preparation for participation in sports. They have a right to an equal opportunity to strive for success. They have a right to be treated with dignity, and they have a right to have fun in sports. Those have been posted on our website for almost 20 years. And recently, when the Aspen Institute, who does a lot of research on kids in sports, we're looking around for something like this. We happen to be the only organization where they could find an organization that had one. And that was across all sports. It wasn't just soccer, but it was across all sports. So we give ourselves a little pat on the back for being a little bit ahead of the game there. So I like to remind coaches that kids do have this Bill of Rights, and we need to be aware of it and try to give them the best opportunity that we can. So let's move on. Waivers and agreements. Waivers have a limited legal value, and that's because minors can't enter into contracts and parents can't waive their child's right to sue. So courts are going to reject any type of waiver. It's frequently also considered a violation of public policy to require release prior to participation in sport. Agreements. The athlete understands in soccer, appreciates the consequences of the risks, knows the rules and procedures for soccer and the importance of following them, and knowing all this, they still request to participate in soccer. So that's what it agrees to when they register to play soccer. In our legal system, there are 4 questions that have to be answered yes for a coach to be found negligent. The first is, does he have a duty? Did he breach the duty? Is there legal cause? Was there damage? So negligent is the failure to meet the standard of behavior established to protect society against unreasonable risk. So again, the standard is always, what you did as a coach, was it reasonable? Did you take reasonable precaution? Did you take reasonable steps to protect the player? And it's that reasonableness that's going to determine whether or not you're negligent, or whether you're negligent at all. So go back. Earlier, I mentioned the baseball player in New Jersey. So as a result of that, New Jersey's legislature actually passed the first law providing immunity to volunteer coaches against frivolous and ordinary negligent lawsuits. There's a number of states that have since passed similar legislation. Pennsylvania is one of those. I'll touch upon that in a minute. And in 1997, the U.S. Congress passed the Volunteer Protection Act. It's a Good Samaritan law that provides volunteer coaches of nonprofit organizations with immunity against frivolous lawsuits. Volunteers are determined by the United States of America to be people who receive less than $500 compensation, excluding reimbursement for expenses. The law doesn't protect volunteer coaches against gross negligence, and the courts get to decide if a lawsuit is frivolous and if it involves either ordinary or gross negligence. Here in Pennsylvania, we have Title 42. It protects volunteers involved with nonprofit youth sports organizations unless the negligence is substantially below standard, which again would be considered gross negligence. 2 exceptions to Pennsylvania 42. One is transportation, and the other is care of real estate unrelated to practice or play. I'm going to touch on transportation just a little bit. That was a line item earlier when I talked about buses for high school teams and coaches of college teams making arrangements for travel. In our case, we do not want to be involved in the travel business with our teams. Do not coordinate the carpool for your team. Let me repeat that. Do not coordinate the carpool for your team. That is best left to the parents, not anybody that is with the team, not an assistant coach or a team mom. Let the parents sort that out on their own. And the reason is that as a representative of the club, if you are the person assigning kids to sit in cars, then you have now made the carpool a club responsibility, and you're the one that put the child in the car that had the accident. So let the parents deal with transportation. 4 steps and 3 options. This is how we limit and prevent risk. This is basic risk management planning. It should be included in your preseason planning, and maybe review as you go through the season. One, you're going to identify risks, then you're going to evaluate those risks, and you're going to develop the plan to manage those risks. And in that plan, you're going to implement a plan. And you've got 3 options. One's to avoid the risk, accept the risk, or transfer the risk. And it really all depends on what the risk is and whether you think it's an acceptable risk or an unacceptable risk. This is part of, it should be planning, your planning process. And 5 recommendations: participate in coaching education, maintain first aid certification, know the rules of the game, and as well know the rules of your league. One of the things that we have pop up here from time to time is coaches don't seem to understand that no pass, no play means that that player who doesn't have a pass is not eligible to play in a game. And when the coach convinces the referee to look the other way and they put that player who does not have a pass because he or she is not registered with their club or has not completed the activation process, they're not eligible. And so if they would get into the game and injure someone or be injured themselves, the likelihood of that being covered by insurance is not very good. And the alternative then would be for the parent to file a lawsuit if the claim is denied. So we need to make sure that we understand what the rules are and follow them. Because when we don't follow the rules, we set an example for the children as well, that it's okay to break the rules and not follow them. So, so that's important. You also need to know the policies and procedures for your club and the facilities where your team will be training or playing. And lastly, as we mentioned before, maintain good records. Keep track of things. Understand track the development of your players. Keep track of injuries. Keep track of who you've trained and what you've done with them. This is all important information. It'll help you down the road if you're with the same team, with the same group of kids. You'll have that baseline of information to use moving forward. But if any questions are raised, you can go back and refer to your notes. You don't have to say, I think, if I remember correctly. You can look at your notes and say, well, according to my notes, I did this, and this on this date. So very important. With that, I have a final, and that is, don't be afraid of what we've discussed here. This is actually empowering. You know what's expected, and most of it is common sense. Most of it is stuff that you're already doing. You just need to be reminded of the couple of little things that you might not have been doing, you might have forgotten to do. So, so don't be afraid. Understand. With that, we'll take questions. I did see in the chat there was a question. Let me see if I can find there's my chat. Okay, question. Risk liability related to coaches providing transportation when players are. So with this particular topic, I would say that if a parent asks you and you have their consent, certainly at that point you could give that child a ride. I would make sure there's another individual in the car, your child or another adult. Again, keep in mind that we're trying to protect the kids, and a practice is always to never be one-on-one with a minor child. So you can do that if the parents have given you permission. But as a general rule of thumb, I would ask them if there's somebody else that they can get a ride with in the among all the parents. And maybe even ask, hey, can somebody, practice, hey, can somebody give Billy a ride? His mom works on Tuesday nights, and it would be helpful if somebody could give him a ride here and a ride home, or maybe split it. Somebody will pick him up and somebody else will give him a ride home. But worst case scenario, as long as the parents have said it's okay and you do have someone else in the vehicle with you, then you've mitigated the risk as much as you can. Your question?
Yep. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions? Covered a lot here, and I tried to get it done as quickly as possible. I just want to make sure I didn't cause any confusion or have anybody who feels more bewildered now than before we started. So if we don't have any more questions, then I will adjourn the session for the evening. I will throw this out if anybody has any ideas for future town halls. Shoot them to me. My email is tim@pawest-soccer.org. Or you can call me at the state office. The phone number there is 412-856-8011, and all of this contact information is available on our website as well. But yeah, if there's a topic that you would like us to discuss, you would like us to find someone to come on and discuss, we'll be glad to pursue that, and do our best to find someone who will do a crackerjack job of presenting on that topic. We're fortunate that I can reach out to 54 other state associations and reach into their many helpers with a wide variety of expertise. So we have access to a lot of knowledge. So if there's something that you think would be important and something that the other clubs could benefit, please don't hesitate to ask. I am, as I've mentioned previously at other town halls and in other meetings, I am working on a couple of town halls to discuss mental health. We've had a number of children in the area in the last 15 months who've committed suicide that were players. We've had a coach also commit suicide. So we're gonna explore that topic with a couple of folks from Western Psych once I get a firm date of their availability, and help us all to understand how we can better support those individuals. Maybe we can prevent the next one. If people know there's somebody out there that they can talk to, somebody they can listen to, then we'll be in good shape. So that's a topic that is coming down the road. It'll probably be a two-part as well. But again, if you have any ideas, please bounce it out. Aaron, yes, I can email you the slide deck. Send me an email at the office, and I will be glad to mail you out a copy of the deck so that you have it as a reference point. So if we don't have any other questions, then I will thank you all very, very much for joining me this evening. I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule and giving me the privilege of your time here. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully more than something, but at least one thing. And we've refreshed some things. If any questions come up afterwards as you're thinking about what we discussed, and you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible with a response and hopefully an answer. So I will turn my thing on and stop sharing and say thank you again. Everyone, please have a nice evening. What's left of it.